Welcome to this conversation with the city runoff candidates about our city and culture. This conversation is presented by a creative collective formed by Music Portland, RAC, OMPA, and Design Week. The executive director of each organization will give a brief description of their constituents and mission. Mera?
Hi there, I'm Mera Mclaughlin. I'm Executive Director of Music Portland, and we are the industry association for the vast independent music ecology in Portland. And we represent more than 20,000 professional musicians who make some or all of their income from recording and performance. The 250 some odd venues and businesses where live music is presented multiple times per week, or they did before the shutdown. And the 700 music businesses that call Portland home. Our local music culture garners international praise for being one of the top 10 music cities in the US, attracting tourists and businesses to a place where people want to live, work, and visit. And before COVID, an estimated 250,000 residents and visitors participated in our independent music scene every month. That's about a third of our total city population. It's more than any other cultural form more frequently. So local music generates billions in direct and indirect revenue in the city, most of which stays in our local economy. And no one in our popular independent music ecology thinks that when the city hall says arts and culture, it includes them. And this is part of the reason why we wanted to assemble this collective to try and position culture as a more inclusive term. And we look forward to hearing what the candidates have to say. And I'll pass it over to Madison.
Thank you, Mera. My name is Madison Cario, and I have had the honor and privilege of guiding the Regional Arts and Culture Council as Executive Director since 2019. An independent nonprofit, RAC supports artists, the creative economy, and arts organizations in Greater Portland by providing both financial and support services, and by managing the internationally acclaimed public art program, and by advocating for diversity, equity, inclusion, and access in all of our programs. We leverage and expand the city's investment by working with partners across sectors. Artists inspire us, right? They delight, challenge, question, connect, and teach us. They remind us where we came from and show us where we're headed. They are also businesses. They employ people, produce revenue, and attract investments. Pre-COVID, the arts community here generated over $330 million in local spending and supported more than 12,000 jobs. Too often, support for this sector falls prey to the argument that we are a luxury or expendable. This could not be further from the truth. Look anywhere in Portland right now and you will see artists at work, using the power of self-expression to move hearts and minds and inspire change. Look around our public spaces and you will see how essential our creative community is. They are leading the call for action, healing, and belonging. Support for arts and culture is support for people, for racial equity, and for the future of this city. As city leaders, we need you to join us in enlisting and compensating artists to lead the search for creative solutions that are centered on empathy, equity, and responsiveness so that we can shape the Portland we want to become. Thank you.
And now we pass to Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Chikala, the Executive Director of OMPA, and we represent the media production professionals working in film, television, commercial, immersive media, and other digital arts. And what we do is we strive to ensure that there is a thriving and equitable business and creative environment for production. And to some, the film industry can sound frivolous or like a giveaway to Hollywood, but I assure you it is not. The reality is we support thousands of family wage jobs and offer a return on investment to the city's economy similar to tourism. Production spent at hotels, on transportation, at restaurants, and in retail. And there's little infrastructure required from the city to attract that spending. Commissioner Nick Fish recognized the value of this industry and worked hard to advocate on our behalf. He saw that very small investments in the industry reap very large benefits, and we're forever grateful for his support, and he is missed. And we now need new champions at the city to recognize the many benefits of attracting and supporting media production. OMPA believes in the future of Portland's creative community, and we hope that you do too. And I will pass to Rachel.
Hi, I am Rachel Coddington, and I'm the Managing Director of Design Portland, which is the parent organization that runs Design Week Portland. What we really do is connect and inform promote and catalyze the designers and aspiring designers across the city through events and research, service. Our work is really targeting to, we try to showcase the value and the importance of high quality design and to implement it to really support the far-reaching effects that it has on matters of civic and cultural, social, and economic relevance. Every year, even this year, though it was virtual, we put on our festival, which is Design Week Portland, and that brings together hundreds of design organizations and community organizers as well as agencies and thousands of participants where, again, this is when we can usually get together in person. We had to pivot several times this year, but we also connect students with the industry, and we've worked with city bureaus on public engagement in partnership with the design community. And we're just excited. You know, the design community is so robust and important in the city, and we're excited to hear about your commitments to the arts and culture in the city and how you might be planning to implement design thinking into city planning, and how the design community and industry here might be more thoughtfully utilized in the future as well.
So these organizations and the creators they represent stand together to defend our local culture and to highlight that creatives, artists, and musicians can be essential contributors in our recovery that should not be underestimated. We can't afford to abandon the people and infrastructure that are critical to making Portland, well, Portland, and we cannot afford to miss any opportunity to support the work of our BIPOC artists and creatives. If acknowledged and engaged, these creators become powerful allies as we rebuild. Portland's art, culture, and creative communities are incredibly diverse and fiercely independent. However, without an intentional investment of resources and care now, they will not be here when this crisis is over. We need the arts and creativity in our lives, and we need to recognize that this work and these people are critical both for the healing of our communities and the creation of an equitable city. We seek city leaders that demonstrate this commitment.
Thank you, Madison. Today we welcome two candidates for City Commissioner position 2, incumbent Claudia Daly and Mingus Maps. City position 4, correct, Mingus? Thank you. We also welcome mayoral candidate Sarah Iannarone to this live event, and we'll be adding a similar interview with Mayor Ted Wheeler that will be available in the recorded version we release later this week. Welcome, Commissioner Claudia Daly.
Thanks, Ambush. I take it that's my cue, and you are playing the voice of God this afternoon.
I'm doing my Morgan Freeman impersonation.
Nice.
Hope it comes
I love
across
it.
good. Okay.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having us. It's so great to be here with you today. My name is Claudia Daly. I'm running for re-election to Portland City Council, position 4, where I proudly serve as your Arts Commissioner, among other things. That position doesn't come with a bureau, dedicated staff, or any budget at all. My role is really to serve as a liaison between RAC, the Arts Education and Access Fund, Portland's Creative Laureate, and the broader arts community to advocate for the interests of our arts and culture community on City Council. I also work with artists and the arts community through 2 of my bureaus, the Portland Bureau of Transportation, or PBOT, and Civic Life. I was a strong advocate and active participant in Portland's arts community for decades before taking my seat on City Council as a fan and patron, volunteer, promoter, supporter, and creator. Since then, I've supported or advanced a number of initiatives benefiting our arts community, from working with Commissioner Fish and his team on updating the city's public art code, developing an affordable arts plan for Portland, and creating the musician loading zone permit program, which I hope we will have put to good use sometime soon when we can all see each other again in one of our many fantastic venues across the city. My office has organized dozens of events at City Hall featuring over 100 artists and arts organizations, welcoming thousands of Portlanders to City Hall, many of them for the first time ever, and honoring Portland art luminaries like George Thorne, Isaka Samsudin, and Dead Moon. More recently, I've fought hard for and secured relief funding from the city and our CARES CARES dollar allocation for artists, arts nonprofits, and independent venues. Many of you know me from my days behind the counter at Reading Frenzy, where which was an independent bookshop devoted to small and independent press, where I organized and curated over 500 free public arts events over the course of 22 years. I'm going to forgive you guys for leaving writers and literary arts out of your long list in the description. And I'm also the co-founder of the IPRC, a makerspace for artists, writers, and self-publishers. I also served as the arts community in other ways, including on the Multnomah County Cultural Coalition, as an independent artist wrangler for the annual Cascade AIDS Project auction, and have partnered with many of our major arts institutions as a guest speaker, curator, and presenter over the past 25 years. But my relationship to art and the role it played in my life runs much deeper than that. My mom claims that I started singing before I started talking. My song of choice was Country Roads by John Denver, in case anyone's curious. And although I grew up in a working class family in rural Oregon, my parents really valued the arts and creative self-expression, and they made sure that I had a really rich arts education, which I am eternally grateful for. I participated in band, choir, and art throughout my school career, and Portland's film, music, and literary scene has been central to my life since I was a teenager. I will also karaoke almost anytime, anywhere, so you can take that as a challenge or not. I keep a karaoke microphone in the desk at my office. So it was growing up in this culturally rich community and cheap rent that allowed me and so many of my peers to launch and succeed in our creative pursuits. But while Portland has built much of its identity on our arts and culture community, the city has not done enough to protect, foster, and grow that community. From the rent crisis to the disappearance of practice and performing spaces, our already delicate arts ecosystem is especially vulnerable in this crisis. But we know that art is essential to our community and to our humanity. The arts will strengthen our recovery and resiliency, and the arts can help heal our communities and build understanding between people and communities. We have to help the arts community and support them to realize the full and many benefits of a thriving arts and culture landscape. I want to thank Music Portland, RAC, OMPA, and Design Week. As a past participant and a big fan of Design Week, it's such a pleasure to join you again, albeit virtually, and I really look forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you so much. So this first question is from OMPA. Our media production industry was quick to develop COVID safety protocols, and now major television series, indie films, and commercials are back up and running. These productions are not only creating living wage jobs, but also spending money on hotels, transportation, restaurants, and retail. This puts us in a unique position to accelerate Portland's economic recovery, but we need the city and its bureaus to prioritize support for our industry. How will you ensure that our city facilitates and supports production and doesn't miss out on opportunities for jobs and revenue?
That's a great question, and certainly a conversation that we need to have as we hopefully start to see the other side of this crisis and understand what recovery could look like. I have been a big supporter of the film office, and when I had BDS, I was lobbying hard to bring the film office into BDS and actually create a film, music, and festival office, because I definitely recognize the many ways that the city is not serving these various industries and communities well currently. We do very little to support the numerous amazing big festivals that bring thousands of tourists to our community and millions of dollars in economic activity. To answer to be honest, I don't have specific solutions to offer as an answer to your question because it is a conversation that hasn't quite happened yet. Of course, our priority is flattening the curve and keeping people safe. My bureau, one of my bureaus, PBOT, certainly has a role in interacting with this industry. We do most of the permitting for the film office. And what I can say is I am very open to conversation with community on best practices and how we can all safely move forward and support the reopening of that particular industry.
Okay. This next question is from all the organizations. Culture of all forms drives tourism and resident lifestyle satisfaction. Good intentions without a funding plan will not deliver results. Other cities like Seattle, Columbus, Ohio, generate millions in dedicated funding to support the two sides of the culture, arts and culture, and film and music. The funds are separate from general funds and specific to those purposes. Our movie tickets cost less than the national average, and our total visitor fees are less than cities far less in demand. Would you support exploration in an entertainment tax, hotel occupancy tax, or some other new revenue stream that was specifically earmarked to expand support for arts and culture and to create the first public resource to support music and film?
Absolutely. In fact, before the COVID shutdown, that was one of many things that my office was exploring. I know Seattle has a small tax on ticket sales, venues of certain sizes. It generates millions of dollars. Certainly open to that. Some organizations and venues are more enthusiastic than others. So I would encourage the community to also have conversations about that, because we would need broad support from all the stakeholders to advance that. We have, we have a lot of competing demand for our funds, and of course we're in very uncertain times economically, but I'm always looking for creative ways to generate more revenue, especially if I can explicitly connect them to the beneficiaries of that revenue. And so something like increasing the lodging tax small amount and dedicating it to the arts would certainly make sense. Again, it's a broader conversation we have to have with not just the arts community, but our tourist industry and stakeholders there. But I agree that we're leaving a lot on the table. I think that Portlanders and the millions of people who are typically visiting our city under normal circumstances wouldn't be bothered by a few extra dollars to go towards enriching our arts community. I'd also like to see the establishment of a cultural district, or at least the expansion of the cultural district, as well as other kind of city facilitated opportunities to really support our local arts and culture.
All right. This next question is from all the organizations as well. What other ideas do you have for rebuilding Portland's artistic and creative communities and ecologies? And could you give us some specific examples?
Sure. I mean, it's not as simple as just investing dollars in the arts community, because we know that so many artists and creative business owners are struggling with housing costs, struggling because their employees can't afford, and artists can't afford to live here, struggling because so many of their customers and patrons are spending the lion's share of what would have been their discretionary income just to keep a roof over their head. So I feel like housing stability and affordability is absolutely essential to this conversation of protecting what's left and growing that environment, the arts and culture community. There were a host of approaches we developed or suggestions we developed in the Arts Affordability Plan, some of which I'm super enthusiastic about, others I'm not that crazy about because I don't think they'll really foster our arts community in the way they want support. Right now, I am looking at every city-owned asset for opportunities, not just for the arts, but for shelter and for providing people with the kind of supports and resources they need right now in this crisis. But PBOT, working with RAC, is, I think, shortly going to launch a really exciting public art project working with BIPOC artists and bringing culturally significant art, in particular commemorating this moment that we find ourselves in across the entire city. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. It's a complex problem. And like I said in my intro, you know, I came up in the 80s and 90s in Portland. My rent in 1988 was $500 for a 5-bedroom house. Sorry to rub it in, everybody. I could live on $500 a month because I rented out every room and the driveway to a friend who lived in a converted bus. And we had, because of that affordability, we had the luxury of time to really explore our creative potential and develop and practice our crafts. And talking to friends who are around my age in their 40s and 50s, whether they are artists, performers, graphic designers, musicians, writers, the one thing we all had in common is that affordable rent allowed us to create. And that is something that is sorely lacking in Portland right now, and a deep concern for me as far as the next generation of artists coming up who won't have that luxury and are going to be hustling for every dollar to pay the rent. How do you fulfill your creative potential when you have to work 2 jobs to pay your rent?
That's yeah, that's bringing it home. $500 for a 5-bedroom.
Old school Portland landlords. I miss those guys.
Shake it off, Ambush. Shake it off.
I'm trying.
I'm sorry, but you know what? I'm still a renter, so what you won't hear from me is how little I paid for my home 20 years ago because I still don't own a home. And I pay a lot of rent now.
Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Up next, I'd like to welcome Mingus Maps.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for pulling this important event together. You know, the arts are incredibly important to me, and I'd like to just take a couple of minutes to share with you the role that the arts and the creative pursuits have played in my life. And then I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking about my vision for the arts and the creative economy here in Portland. I think there's both a cultural dimension to that, which I think we need to value, and that there's obviously an economic dimension to that, which we need to talk about. And we face enormous challenges as we confront COVID and its impact and try to figure out how we come back from that. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mingus Maps. I'm a candidate for Portland City Council running for position number 4. A lot of you probably do know me, but you might not know this about me. My full name is Mingus Ulysses Maps, which is a sign of how much the arts have penetrated and shaped my life. Of course, I was named after Charles Mingus. This is the question I get most often. I was named after Charles Mingus, who was a jazz musician, and my middle name, Ulysses, is for the James Joyce book, Ulysses, which I view as basically a curriculum that an arts curriculum that my parents handed down to me. It shaped my life, and as you know, between Charles Mingus and Ulysses, it's given me a lot to think about. I've carried on that tradition with my 2 young boys. My oldest child is named Langston Dizzy Maps. Of course, he was named after Langston Hughes, the Black writer, and Dizzy Gillespie, the jazz musician. And my youngest son is named Coltrane Baldwin maps. And of course, he was named after John Coltrane, the jazz musician, and James Baldwin, the writer. And I gave them these names because I think the arts and artistic pursuits teach us about ourselves and can help us during hard times in history. I think that that's part of what my parents were trying to do when they gave me my names. When I named my kids Langston Dizzy maps and Coltrane Baldwin maps, I hope that they will find inspiration in the artists who I've named them after. The role of arts in my life goes even deeper. We live in inner Southeast, just a couple of blocks from Buckman Elementary School. And the reason why we live here is because I value the arts. Buckman is an arts magnet school. I wanted my kids to have that opportunity to take dance and music and graphic arts in elementary school. So we picked the school and then found housing to make it work. And that's been a life-transforming experience and one of the best things I've ever done. And I have a long history of bringing and promoting arts in Portland. For example, I used to be executive director for Historic Park Rose, which is a nonprofit group dedicated to promoting equitable economic development in East Portland. And that job told me that the arts can play an important role in bringing a community together and sparking economic vitality. For those of you who spend any time up in Park Rose, if you know the mural that's on the side of Grocery Outlet at about 107th and Sandy, I helped make that happen. And the point of that mural is to remind people in the neighborhood of who they are and where they came from, that beautiful farming landscape. For those of you who spent time out in East Portland, you might know Taste of Park Rose was the street fair, which I helped to organize for many, many years. You brought together local craftspeople. We had live music, and it was really a celebration of community. It generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in economic activity. And, I think through the arts and both through dance and music, it really brought the community together and helped build our social capital. In addition to that, I've served on the board of the Jim Pepper Native Arts Festival, which under normal times would be happening right now, a music festival that celebrates the talents and creativity of our Native American neighbors. You should look for that online. I'm sure it's coming up again soon. And I also want people to know that because of this background, I appreciate how complex the creative community here in Portland is. I know that there are many different divisions within it. So we have the nonprofit side of the arts community, and we have the for-profit side, sort of like a ballet and performing music. We have also large institutions and small institutions which face different challenges. I think all aspects of this ecosystem are important, but there's some particularly important things that we do during this time, like, for example, maintaining equitable access to funds for people of color and low-income folks. And at the same time, I think we have to think about institutional concerns, like maintaining our performance spaces, because if we lose those, we're likely to lose the foundation that supports our local arts community. And the arts are important to Portland for a couple of different reasons. There's a cultural reason, and this is more important than ever. There is literal, I think, emotional healing that our city will need to go through as we recover from COVID. We're likely to be essentially quarantining in place for about a year. That has all sorts of psychological impacts on you. Especially for those of you who are living at home with young children, you realize they were on one trajectory and now suddenly we're going off in a different direction. Some of it's fine and some of it's going to be traumatic. One of the ways in which we deal with trauma here in Portland is through the arts. So for me, one of the things I often think about is the great murals over at the Hollywood Transit Center, which help us process a cruel act of racism and hate. And of course, the arts play an incredibly important part in our economy. And it's not just, it's not just the people who get up on stage to perform, but it's all the people who bring the stage together and, serve drinks in the sidelines. That's why this economy literally brings in tens of millions of dollars to our local community. I'll also point out that there's a lot of work to be done. When I'm on council, there's several things I want to accomplish to make the the city a better partner to the creative community. So for example, as we process and try to navigate this COVID moment, I think it's important that we do all we can do to help preserve our performing arts spaces. I think the City Hall could be a better partner with that. So for example, I want to create a music office, which is much like our film office, to help the music community navigate permits and work out policy questions. I also think that it would be helpful if the city had some sort of arts policy advisory group that can come in and help process and sort out issues that come up, everything from parking for unloading equipment to noise complaints. I think that's quite important. I also think equity in the arts is incredibly important. Let's just get the city out of the business of policing hip hop. That's ridiculous and discriminatory and chokes us off from creating a whole new generation of talent. I also want to say that we need to have good partners in City Hall as we begin to figure out how to open up our performing arts spaces again. You folks face the biggest challenge of anyone in the economy, because to make your basic business model work, we have to bring people together at a time when people can't come together. That's going to require creative use of space. I celebrate the sort of use of sidewalks and quiet streets to let people dine. I'd be excited about moving music outside too. I am just a couple of blocks away from the Blue Diamond, and they've started to do some performances outside. I'm sure Commissioner Daly and I can probably hear them when the sound is right. I think that's great. I think we could look to expanding arts and performance spaces into parks, for example, which might be a way to activate our parks and keep our live performing arts communities working. And I agree. I can remember Commissioner Daly talked about her first house in Portland, which costs, I forget, $500 a month. I can go back even further. I have an uncle who and the house doesn't exist, but I know he paid $75 for a house in Portland in the 70s, right over on Division and 20th. And it's awfully hard these days to find deals like that, especially if you are in an unfairly compensated industry like the creative economy. That's why I think it's important that we make progress on both bringing more affordable housing to the city and also bringing back performance spaces and creative spaces. Both the COVID thing, it threatens to ruin and take out our creative making spaces. And you might recall a few years ago, we had this moment when lots of the artist workspaces where people would make visual arts basically went under I think we need to change that. And, I also recognize and hear people in the creative community when they tell me, we just have cash flow problems, we need some sort of stabilization fund. And I'll work with City Hall and the private sector to figure out if we can come up a way to provide artists and people in the creative community with access to loans and grants that'll keep them afloat and let them expand their work. I think this is really exciting. One thing which I'm sure is true of this moment, which feels dark and full of chaos and uncertainty. I am absolutely certain as we move forward, Portland will be at the forefront of creating great art about this moment, and that art will define what Portland in the future looks like and what our culture is.
Thank you tremendously. You have definitely answered one of the three questions I had for you already, which was giving me some specifics of some of the ideas that you would have for rebuilding. So we're going to skip that question and jump into another question that's from all the organizations. Like marginalized communities, creative workers have minimal capacity to survive the tsunami of evictions looming from the shutdown without additional protections and forgiveness of deferred rents past the governor's extended moratorium to the end of 2020. Where do you stand on issues of housing relative to this ongoing pandemic?
Oh, I think our starkest concern right now. Everyone is having trouble meeting their basic needs, and certainly our most fundamental need is affordable housing. That's why I support extending the eviction ban until we're through this eviction, until we're through this economic crisis. I think this is also a time when we need to step up and double down on protecting renters' rights. One of my theories about how we survive this moment is to invest as many federal relief dollars as possible into emergency rental assistance so no one loses their housing in the first place. A thing that the city has done terrible at over time is to develop and actually implement anti-displacement policies. You know, one of the ironies of this moment is that, you know, improvements to public transportation and parks, for example, two things that we all love, will also have the net effect of causing the people who need those services most, members of the BIPOC community and low-income folks from those neighborhoods. You know, so there's an irony there. We need to actually come up with a plan that moves forward in tandem with our equity efforts, you know, because otherwise our equity efforts actually have the ironic effect of driving, frankly, Black people out of the city. And then I think we need to focus in on doing things like creating more affordable housing. And frankly, one of the things I've learned since I've been doing this campaign, which is more than a year, is that one of the most effective ways to bring affordable housing to the city is to preserve the affordable housing that we have. And at the same time, I think we need to get City Hall out of the way of building more affordable housing. You know, right now, if you want to build an affordable housing unit, it can take more than a year to get your plans approved. And you can pay as much in fees to the city for your affordable housing project as you do for actual materials to build your homes. You know, that's a great example of how the city is holding back affordable housing. Given the fact that we've got another 250,000 people moving to our city in the next 20 years, we need to change that. And when I'm on city council, I will push to change that.
All right. This next question is from RAC. Last year, Portland's voter-approved Art Access and Education Fund, generally known as the Arts Tax, generated about $13.1 million in revenue for the arts. Arts tax money goes first to arts education in all Portland public schools. As a result, last year, every K-5 student in the city of Portland had an art, music, or dance teacher, serving more than twice as many kids as the fund was created, as when the fund was created in 2012.
Yep.
Any remaining funds go to nonprofit arts organizations in the form of grants from RAC, expanding access to the arts from Portland residents. What changes to Portland's Art and Access and Education Fund, if any, would you want Portland City Council to consider?
Sure. Well, I support the arts tax, but I do think that we could administer it more effectively. It's pulling in fewer dollars than we expected it to, and frankly, it's kind of clumsy to administer. One of the things I have been doing and will do when I'm on city council is to see if we can change the way we collect that. One idea is to actually, instead of having the city administer the arts tax, to see if we can cooperate and collaborate with state government to see if we can put the arts tax on your state income tax form. So instead of it being this weird envelope that you get and it falls in a pile, it's just a checkbox that you can move off. I think that would both decrease the cost of collecting that tax and increase the amount of money that we have. And my other concern about that, you know, I love the arts tax and I love the fact that we are serving kids with this. You know, my kids literally benefit from it. You know, we got dance and music and visual arts, and it's really great. One of my concerns is that although Portland does a great job of nurturing young artists, one of the things that we don't really have is a place for them to perform after they get out of school. So, you know, where there's this pipeline to actually creating engaged working artists breaks because we don't have enough venues for that. And that's why I think it's so important that we preserve the venues that we do have. And actually, one of the things I really want to do is to see if we can get in the business of creating some shared space to create music, you know, for example. I've heard some exciting ideas about getting a large office building or venue where we could have recording studios. Number one, that would help. I think that would help young people make that transition to making art as they exit school. I think it would bring down the cost of actually producing art here in Portland, and it would create this kind of infrastructure that ensures that we have a continuum of artists from, my kids making art with popsicle sticks to, my friends' kids who are literally cutting hip hop albums and going on tour.
Let me unmute. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much. It was great. Up next, Sarah Anron, your opening statement.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name is Sarah Annerin, and I'm running for Portland Mayor. I'm so glad to be here along with Commissioner Daly and Mr. Maps talking about these important issues. They are critical to the future of Portland. They should be at the center of our discussions in the COVID recovery, and I'm happy to have this moment to share my ideas about Portland's recovery and our future with you today. Big thanks to Music Portland, RAC, OMPA, Design Week, PDX, and DJ Ambush for bringing us all together. A few things about me that may be relevant before I move into my policy ideas. I am a working class mom, a small business founder. In fact, the business that I founded, the Arleta Library Cafe, was in a neighborhood district. It recently closed due to COVID, but during our time there, we made sure to feature the arts prominently. We had always fresh art on the walls. It was curated by muralist Chris Haberman. And also we were making sure that we were putting a lot of art in our neighborhood as we brought a vibrant business community together there, including on the Mount Scott Community Center. And I'm thankful to RAC for their investments in our neighborhood. I'm also the co-founder of the Arleta Triangle Project, which was a guerrilla pocket park that my neighbors and I came up with as a way to calm traffic and make a beautification investment in a neighborhood that had a reputation. Our nickname was Felony Flats. Sometimes when people were being kind, they would call us Methlehem. And another thanks to RAC on that, we had a $5,000 grant from RAC to help us pay a local artist to build that space. I have also served recently on the board of the Halperin Landscape Conservancy, which was an innovative partnership to bring together people from across sectors to help us restore and maintain the beautiful historic Portland open space sequence that runs through downtown Portland that was designed by Lawrence Halperin. It's not just a regional amenity, but it's globally known. And so that innovative partnership is one of the creative ways that we've come to understand we're paying for arts, public spaces, and other cultural amenities in our city. So I have a very interesting and somewhat diverse experience in Portland's arts community from the placemaking side in particular, as I've interfaced with those things. But I have a pretty broad view of what culture means to me. Visual arts, music, theater, film and video, design and illustration, writing and literary arts, and even urban design and architecture and placemaking, like I mentioned before. These spaces that we create and tend, whether people are performing in them intentionally, performing unintentionally, or just enjoying them, are all so important to our city. They're vital to our health, and they're vital to our economy. And more than just describing the current state of affairs, arts puts a mirror on us. It helps us understand who we are, even as we work through the challenges of the day. We've seen this in the protests downtown with the amazing art, where there is a new elk holding space for us as we figure out our future on the front of public safety. It helps influence us, show us the beautiful things that we want to move toward, helps us act with urgency on our social problems individually as well as collectively. Throughout my campaign, we focused on making sure that we were commissioning local art. In the primary and now in the general election, our posters have always been designed by local BIPOC and women artists. And we are consistently inspired that the guerrilla art that a lot of people are doing on our behalf that we don't even request. And so thanks to everyone who's made posters or stickers or all the things that make Portland so lively. Art inspires me day after day. And as your next mayor, I want you to know that I deeply love and appreciate the arts in Portland, and I will fight to ensure that Portland invests in the arts in a way that doesn't hurt artists or relegate them to the category of low income or to the margins, which we've for too long done. We have things that we can do as a city of Portland to ensure access to good paying green collar jobs for our artistic and creative workers, while ensuring they have homes they can afford so they can live here and transit to access them. I know from my decade of work at Portland State University, hosting visiting leaders from around the world, that Portland's brand as a creative innovation hub is strong. I've hosted so many people who came here not to study transit investments or downtown revitalization, but to understand the relationship between arts and creativity and economic competitiveness, including from the film and media industry in Brazil, comic book makers from Japan and placemakers from New Zealand. And together, we've explored our regional comparative advantage in the global marketplace and understood how different investments in education and workforce development and arts and creatives related small businesses can help us grow and prosper more equitably in the future. I know that we're on the right track, or at least we have been for some time, but there's so much more we could be doing to support these local industries. And I believe that they can be a pathway to opportunity for Portlanders that is low carbon and lifts up our BIPOC community members. And I also understand that they're resilient, and I'm guessing there's a question coming up about the COVID recovery, so I'll save my bit of the introduction on that for that next phase. But I do want to announce something important, and that is, and I have to give a big shout of thanks to Commissioner Daly for bringing arts and culture into City Hall so robustly. I've been so happy every time that building is open where we can go in and celebrate together. In that vein, my campaign is hosting a benefit concert. We just announced it today. It will be virtual, of course, but it will be Friday the 9th, and I want to invite everyone to it. We're calling it Vote Out the Gas, and it's part of our GOTV effort, and we're going to have the Slants and Colin Malloy and Chris Funk from the Decemberists and Corin Tucker from Slater Kinney and Laura Vieres and Edna Vasquez and Patty King from the Shins, Cameron Witten, Ian Carmel, Andy Main, DeRay McKesson, and so many more people, because these artists and creatives understand that we need new leadership in that mayor's office. We've made art a central part of our campaign because we know it's the lifeblood of our city. We know it's critical to our economy, and we want to keep these artists engaged in the problem solving. They're going to be critical as we craft new solutions to our most pressing problems, and we really need them working alongside us in City Hall to make our city one that really works for the people again. This has been a really hard time for the performing artists of our city, and I hope you'll come to our free concert. It's a sliding scale, so no one will be turned away for lack of funds, and I hope you can join us just in celebrating these arts in our city at this time.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for the invite. This first question is from Music Portland. Portland has a dark history of closing down successful Black-owned music venues. We currently have only 2 venues in the city owned by Black, Indigenous, or folks of color. One for experimental music and theater, the other bringing jazz to our eastern boundary. Would you make a creation of a Black-owned and curated music and arts center a priority?
I've actually made creation of Black-owned business in general a priority. And one of the things that I'm committed to doing is making sure that we're using good centralized data systems to track the impacts of our investments on BIPOC small business owners and startups and creatives. One thing that we have not seen over time is a concentrated investment in this area. Our deployment of resources has been very scattershot and ad hoc, and sometimes we talk a good game on the front end, but then when it comes to the deliverables, we're not really seeing the impact that we want. So what I proposed is actually a director of small business and entrepreneurship on my mayor's office staff in particular, to make sure that they're tracking all of the various incentives that are coming out of the city bureaus, offices, and our community partners in the city and around the region, wherever those resources are coming from, making sure that they're deployed strategically and with an eye to equitable and inclusionary outcomes. This is going to be very important for the future because we need to make our impact match up with our rhetoric. If those kinds of venues are something that Black business owners want to deploy, then that offer will be there so that they can get not just the capital assistance that they need, but the technological assistance that they need. And I believe this is going to be a step in the right direction for getting a lot of those business owners, entrepreneurs, and people who want to invest in startups back on the right track.
Okay, this next question is from all the organizations. The city has an arts concierge, a creative laureate, and a city arts manager, as well as a film office within Prosper. These roles have limited and duplicate powers, no funding, and unclear mandates. The enormous independent music ecology that has complex interactions with nearly every city department has no representation or influence at all. If starting from scratch, describe your best ideas for empowered liaison roles for each creative sector to work with city departments to imbue culture throughout city strategy.
So what this is really about is what you measure is what you'll get, and what you value is what you end up paying for. And we haven't said that we're going to recognize that artists and creatives are powerhouses at the center of our economy, and that if we're going to invest in that as a sector, then we need to be strategic about it. We don't actually have an economic development plan for the city right now that's centering artists and creatives in that work. And this is where we need to, in many ways, take the arts and creatives and culture industries out of the realm of just simply entertainment, and making sure that they're part of the thriving cultural and creative economy. And that means that you think about that strategically. You make sure that you're not wasting precious resources by having duplicative efforts. It makes sure that you're centralizing your investments and measuring impact so that you can really ensure you're meeting your equity goals. And we also need to make sure that even as we are making these strategic investments from the center of the city, that we're rethinking how we can support the workers in this industry. So supporting organized labor and the unions as they're working, but making sure that our freelancers are also backed up by protections, because right now so many of them are left out of that equation. They're functioning in the gig economy. They're not able to collect often after they provide creative services. And we need to make sure that all of the workers in this industry are shored up as well. So making sure I have a labor relations person on my staff who's understanding our workforce needs is going to be critical, in tandem with that small business and entrepreneurship lead in my office.
All right. This final question. This is from all the organizations. What other ideas do you have for rebuilding Portland's artistic and creative communities and ecologies? And could you give us some examples?
Yeah, I'll give you a few concrete examples, and we can talk a little bit about the recovery as the jumping off point for how we think about funding arts investments in the future. And I will just point you toward my website, which is sarah2020.com. If you want to see the recovery plan, it's /recovery. But we have to think about, again, as I said, centering artists and creatives in our economic development strategy. I believe that we need to explore a progressive, fair share approach to funding arts, culture, educational programming that goes beyond the arts tax. I'm glad that the arts tax is there, but when you think about that $13 million relative to the $8 million we just spent on the protests this summer, it seems like a drop in the bucket. And then you look at the fact that we're having to go to voters again this fall to shore up our parks and recreation funding. And to me, we need to be thinking about how are we investing in education, in parks, in recreation, in artists and creatives as something that are a public health issue, so that we are thinking in terms of how we can make our communities more connected, cohesive, tolerant, and cohesive. We need to make sure that we're getting our young people access to the training they need. So could we be thinking about strategic investments, say in Gateway, where we have partnerships with local high schools and community colleges in the digital arts and entertainment, and even getting them into the film and media industry, because the capital investments are low and it's very easy for them to get quickly into family wage jobs through those pipelines to opportunity. We can rethink city zoning and development processes for more affordable housing that's co-located with creative and maker space, or a range of family scales, so that multiple generations of people can reside together, or where childcare opportunities are co-located there as we make investments. And I hope you'll support me in supporting the universal pre-K ballot measure. That's also going to be on your ballots this November. But we have to think holistically, and we have to put arts and culture and that industries associated at the center of it. Not that everything needs to be commodified. I understand that arts and creativity need to at some point sit above and outside the economic systems, but if we're going to make those investments strategically as a city, then I believe that we have a lot of things in our toolbox that we can do to make sure that the money that we have is progressive and not regressive, and that we're deploying them for good outcomes that are more equitable and effective over the long term.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Mingus. Thank you, Chloe. Up next, we have some questions from the audience. This question is from Tony Tabor Roberts. What can the city do to be proactive in creating an inclusive arts and culture planning process to mobilize, engage, and leverage many of the communities represented here through music, media, tech, public art, and the others that are not here, literary arts, education, et cetera, especially on arts and culture makers who are traditionally underrepresented and underfunded? Anyone can jump in on that one. Not everybody at once now.
That's a big question. I'll try to address that. So, you know, one of the many things that has been put on hold, whether it's been due to lack of funding or the COVID crisis, is a cultural mapping project that we want to do in conjunction with RAC. This mapping project will show us all of our kind of assets and resources, where they're located and what's lacking, and what I hope provide us with some opportunities to preserve and grow spaces for art in particular. It just grieves me how many opportunities we have missed over the last 10 to 20 years because of our lack of investment and kind of lack of vision around protecting and growing our arts community. I was involved in those early conversations with the Creative Action Network, which ultimately led to the arts tax. And I was there possibly the only person advocating for all creative businesses, not just nonprofits, as well as individual artists, and trying to sound the alarm. This is well over 10 years ago now, about the affordability crisis and the disappearance of these spaces. So I would love to see the city invest in those spaces. That was a really big question. Could you actually repeat it? I want to make sure that I'm getting to all the...
Sure. What can the city do to be proactive in creating an inclusive arts and culture planning process to mobilize, engage, and leverage the many communities represented here and the others that are not here, especially on arts and culture makers who are traditionally underrepresented and underfunded?
Sure. I guess I would highlight the great work that RAC has done in from diversifying their board to changing the way they distribute general operating funds to ensure that we're more equitably investing in arts organizations and artists across all of our communities. I don't, you know, the city is not serving the small business community well in general. And there is definitely an intersection there between artists and businesses. So I think I'd love to see a similar approach to establishing a committee or commission made up of a diverse array of arts and culture denizens and creators and producers and presenters to really inform the city on and our policies and practices. When we don't have those voices at the table, and I think that the Arts Affordability Plan is a little bit of an example of this. I mean, I think we did a really good job. Like I said, there's many great ideas in that plan, but with more community input and more diverse input, I think we could make that plan a lot better. I just see the city acting in so many ways, you know, having our heart in the right place, but not bringing the right people to the table. So ultimately the results and the impacts are not what we are aiming for. We have historically paid a lot of lip service to diversity and equity. I can honestly say that the city is really beginning to walk their talk across multiple bureaus. And, you know, we're poised to have the most diverse and possibly the most progressive city council that the city has ever seen. So these are really exciting conversations moving forward. I will say from myself, my office and my bureaus, we center racial equity in everything we do. So any conversations about the arts would necessarily include how we better serve culturally specific groups and BIPOC artists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just give two really short examples, because Commissioner Daly was able to fit in a lot there, but I think there are two things that I'm proposing that would be very helpful. One is that focus on participatory budgeting. So making sure that how we decide to use our money is co-created. And that's something that I think is going to go a long way toward helping us meet our goals. And another thing is thinking about how we plan and who we tap into as the experts in our city. Oftentimes we lead toward the technocratic and the bureaucratic. And I've been talking with folks like Kevin Jones at the August Wilson Red Door Project, where he's using arts and theater to actually educate lawmakers and policymakers around police reform. So I do think it's important to actually have artists and creatives leading conversations, not just about the future of arts and creatives in the city, but around the future of a lot of things in the city. And that's one way to center those voices and those processes even further to increase their impact, but also to tap into the power of those voices in helping us shape the outcomes that we'd like to see.
I really love that response. Number one, participatory budgeting coming to you soon from the city of Portland. Sarah, what was that last? It is so hot in my house right now.
Oh, I was talking about putting artists and creatives actually in charge of processes. I mean, this is something that's here time and again, that they're relegated to participant, when in fact, you know, they have the skills, the communication skills, the cultural skills to lead us through a lot of these conversations about our shared future.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like we know that arts education benefits every discipline and every subject and can be integrated into all of them, arts could be integrated into every one of our bureaus and our you know, really help transform our whole approach. I love it.
And if I could, this has been a rich discussion, if I could add a different perspective. If we return to the original question is, I think it was, you know, how can we build a inclusive arts planning process? And if I paused as we were trying to answer this, it was because I'm not sure Portland has an inclusive arts planning process. And that's part of the problem. That's why I'm calling on the city to create some sort of central office or a planning body that helps us develop a comprehensive approach to the creative community. You know, it could be a music office or a creative economy policy council. That council can deal with big issues like, you know, how do you deal with, you know, unloading bands, for example, or band equipment, to larger issues such as, you know, what do we do about inequality and the lack of access to arts opportunities for people of color. So when I'm on council, I will push for the creation of a group like that, some citizens body, which is in charge of developing recommendations on how the city can actually develop an inclusive arts and planning policy. That group will have a couple of directives from me. First, we have to center, you know, equity issues and come from it from an equity lens. I'm going to ask that group to audit our current practices and eliminate practices that are discriminatory. You know, I'm very concerned about the over-policing of hip hop, for example. And I also believe that another thing that we really need here is an engaged city council, or an engaged council and engaged elected officials who realize this is an important part of the economy and an important part of our city, both getting the arts economy right and making sure that it's diverse and inclusive. That's what I think the next part of the mission of the next city council. And I look forward to being part of that discussion.
All right, thank you. Thank all three of you. This next question is specifically for Sarah. This is from Diane Hunt. Very happy to hear about the concert on October 9th, but do tell me, will all those wonderful artists be paid for their work, or have they been asked to do this gratis as a part of a government effort?
Actually, they weren't asked at all. This is something that they're putting on for me because they endorsed me for Portland mayor, and they want to do this instead of donating money to the campaign. I'm working as a publicly financed candidate, and so we're asking people to give between $5 and $250 to my campaign who want to support us. And this was, I was in a meet and greet with many artists, and they like the vision of the future that I was putting forward. And so this is something that they're doing to support my campaign. But that said, we have made it a point of trying to pay every artist who is contributing materially to our campaign. And we often offer payment when people offer to do things for free, even, and sometimes they refuse. But thank you, that's a really important question, and I'll make sure that our artists are supported when I'm in office for sure.
Thank you. We glossed over it. Someone touched on it a little bit earlier. Question from Anonymous specifically. Do you see participatory budgeting as a way to engage our community and intersect with arts and culture here in Portland? I guess, how do you see that?
Was that for me specifically? Or
No, that was for everyone.
Oh, okay. I'll let other people speak because I just spoke, and then I can.
Right.
I'll jump in. Indeed, I do. I think that's one of the ways in which you get better budgets and better democracy. I think one of the reasons we have so many Portlanders who feel alienated and disappointed in City Hall is they feel disconnected from the processes that we go through. So I think if you want to have a good budget and a city that the Portlanders embrace, it's important that we create room for citizens to actually participate in the budget process. And this is not new to Portland. People might not remember, but I was working over in the county chair's office when we did something very similar. I think that's one of the reasons why county government did quite well in the late 20th century, I guess it must have been. I'm excited to reinvent and update participatory budgeting for the 21st century. And I think we're going to have a discussion like that if we are going to heal and move forward. Right now, a lot of Portlanders have zero trust for City Hall and are very disappointed in the ways in which our government is working. I think the only way that we bring people back to the fold and back to the table is to actually invite them to the table. And that's one thing I'll insist on when I'm in City Hall.
Well, I'm a big fan of participatory budgeting, and I've been trying to bring it to City Hall since I arrived. The challenge is that we've never had a big enough pot of money to both develop and support the process and have money left over to allocate. I'm happy to say that we finally have about $3.5 million that we're going to be using for, I believe, 2 to 3 different budgeting processes with different culturally specific groups. Most of that money is going to come from cannabis tax dollars that we took back from the police bureau. And I'm also about to launch an online civic engagement platform for the city of Portland. It's part of my COVID response, but it's also something that we could have used for many years, and I think will serve us well moving forward. And that platform is where we'll be able to conduct this participatory budgeting process since we can't gather together. So very engaged in that, very enthusiastic. If you're curious about what participatory budgeting is, I would Google that term along with New York City. They have a really well-developed program there that is certainly going to be one of many models that we use going forward. Thanks for the question.
Absolutely. So did you have anything that you wanted to add to that, or are we good? Excellent. Okay, so first, I'd like to thank all of today's participants, as well as the organizations and constituents that they represent. More now than ever, I think it's important that we seize opportunities like this as a community of musicians and creatives to really take ownership of where we are politically and the moves we'd like to get made on the future, on behalf of us, places we'd like to be. The change that we've convinced each other is impossible or improbable simply because it fits the narrative of fighting the power. But whose narrative is this? I'd like to encourage us to bring our concerns into focus for the people that are looking to shape our future. Thank you guys so much for your time today. Mera, did you have anything else?
I don't, but I'm just endlessly thankful that everyone was willing to engage, and to our collective creative cultural organizations, I think coming together as a group, and I'm sure it will add additional organizations representing all the different sides of culture, and having the city start to think beyond its traditional sort of arts and culture definition, really to think about culture as a much more pervasive and inclusive part of our city and major asset that's going to help us rebuild. So I'm appreciative to everybody that joined today, and I'm hopeful that we together can rebuild our city and make it better.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Thanks to everyone who tuned in, and thanks to everyone who organized this event, and thanks to my colleagues for participating. It was fun.
Bye-bye all.
We're talking with Mayor Ted Wheeler. Mr. Mayor, would you like to make a brief statement about your candidacy as it relates to our cultural sectors, both nonprofit and for-profit?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, arts and culture is critical to the livability of the city. People love the fact that Portland is a creative and innovative place. It's a place that's inclusive. It values pushing the envelope in leadership, and that includes, of course, our arts and culture community. And the city of Portland has long had a very strong arts and culture community, both on the for-profit as well as on the nonprofit side. Under COVID, everybody is struggling. And that includes not only artists who are finding their ability to make a living significantly curtailed. It includes musicians who no longer have access to venues. It includes art galleries that are no longer open. It includes large venues like our large arts and cultural institutions, which are no longer open under the COVID restrictions, and even smaller venues that support and uplift new and emerging artists. They also find themselves struggling under the economic consequences and the public health needs around COVID. And I am extremely pleased with the City of Portland and my colleagues on the Portland City Council collective responses to the COVID crisis, particularly as it relates to arts and cultures. As people know, we allocated almost $4.5 million of our CARES funding specifically to arts and culture. This was not always easy. There were some of my colleagues who were not on board with this allocation. I personally lobbied my colleagues to make sure that that allocation would go through. And I was really pleased by the fact that it not only included support for our venue operators, both nonprofit and for-profit venue operators. It also included substantial resources for small businesses, which include a lot of people who are engaged in the arts and culture space. It included grant funding for the BIPOC community and BIPOC artists to make sure that they could continue to be resilient during this trying time. And I'm pleased that from the beginning of my administration, we really highlighted the importance of the Regional Arts and Culture Council. We pushed RAC, don't get me wrong. We allocate about $4 million a year to RAC. So we pushed really hard for accountability upon the entrance of a new executive director, Madison, who I think has been fantastic. We agreed to communicate more, to be more accountable with the resources. And I was pleased that along with Commissioner Daly, we provided the financial support for a city auditor recommended position that would go in OMF that was specifically for the purpose of coordinating our arts and cultural activities through the city council. This is something Nick Fish and I worked on very early in my administration, and I was really proud to see that come to fruition. And finally, we've made a commitment not only to RAC, but also arts and cultural spaces generally to advocate at the state level for additional resources to get us through the COVID crisis. As I look at where the partnership is ahead, I want to make sure that our arts and culture community remains strong, that it remains sustainable, and that it remains inclusive. So going forward, I'd like to see us work to lift up and engage more artists of color. I would like to see us spend our resources to really uplift local artists, including emerging artists. And I have a personal interest in working with the RAC board and others in the community to elevate Indigenous and Native art in our community. I believe there's a story there that can only be told through an artistic and a cultural lens. And I'd like to see us allocate more resources to help make that happen. And I've seen other cities like Seattle or Anchorage do a really effective job there. And I know this is something that RAC is interested in, and they brought in leadership that's committed to these values, but that's an area where personally I'd like to engage going forward. So thank you for working with me for the past 4 years. My team and I would like to stick around beyond December and continue the good work with the City Council and our community partners. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that opening statement. So first question, Portland's outdated 2011 Arts and Culture Plan languishes on the sidelines because culture, including the arts, popular music, independent film, live theater, creative design, and more, has not been prioritized as a key city value. As urban issues get harder, cultural engagement becomes more, not less important. Culture should be as central to public policy as green spaces. No one debates if there should be parks in our city, only how to strategically support them as a shared value. By comparison, city support for music, arts, theater, dance, and film is questioned every budget cycle. As Portland examines its own charter and considers a shift to a city manager model, how would you foster a city hall that integrates our cultural communities into city strategies?
Yeah, that's a broad question, and it's an excellent one, DJ Ambush. So thank you for asking it. First of all, full disclosure, the Regional Arts and Culture Commission, as I say, takes about $4 million a year in public funding. And in addition to that, we've allocated other grant resources. We've supported the arts community through the work we're doing in our economic development agency, Prosper Portland. And every one of those dollars is scrutinized. But that's not specific to arts and cultural programming. These are taxpayer dollars. They're limited. The City Council has, I think, a moral obligation to make sure that those dollars are being spent wisely. And that's why it's really important that we have those strong connections, both to the institutions that represent arts and culture, but also the individuals, the community that is surrounding arts and culture in the city of Portland, to make sure that we do make that case. And that's a case that's been made very strongly to me. It's reflected in decisions I've made to increase resources and funding. It's reflected in the fact that I made sure that arts and culture was a specific category called out in our CARES Act funding. And it's something that continues to be supported through my executive budgets that I provide to the council at the very beginning of the budget cycle.
Okay. Do you see participatory budgeting as a way to engage our community and intersect with arts and culture here in Portland?
I do. I like participatory budgeting. The City Council has experimented with it on a smaller scale, of course. We have about $500 million every year in discretionary resources. A lot of that's already accounted for. But we have been using participatory budgeting for different purposes. For example, during the recent round of discussions around police reform, as we defunded a couple of units that were seen as being disproportionately impactful of communities of color, particularly Black communities, we reallocated those resources to the community, and a large chunk of that, at the request of the community, has gone towards a participatory budgeting process around the homeless population, and particularly the disproportionality of people of color amongst our homeless population. And I know there's been discussions in other contexts around the city around participatory budgeting. I like the idea of arts and culture coming with a plan from the community that we could engage around. And some of the dollars that we allocated, for example, around CARES, some of those suggestions came directly from the community. People said, look, the COVID crisis hit people of color first, it hit them worst, and that is reflected in our arts and culture community as it is in the broader population. So please make sure as you allocate dollars, you are specifically and intentionally setting aside resources for people of color in the community, which we did. So we don't exactly have a participatory process today. I would say it is community informed, but I like the idea of actually creating a specific engagement mechanism directly for our community partners.
Excellent. Okay. So what other ideas do you have for rebuilding Portland's artistic and creative communities and ecologies? Could you provide some specific examples?
Yeah, I would. First of all, the arts tax was really important. I sat there at the table with former Mayor Sam Adams and many others who will undoubtedly see this in the first Creative Coalition meetings when this idea was first coming to light. We, of course, as a city, implemented the arts tax. I think all of us agree it's highly imperfect. The concept is really important. The value is really important, but I believe that we need to do some rework on the actual mechanisms around that tax. So I'd like to work with RAC and other arts and cultural organizations to talk about that and how we might improve things and improve the amount of resources that are actually collected through the arts tax so that we can live up to the original promises that were made many, many years ago. The second area that is critically important for me, and the city doesn't necessarily get directly involved in education, but education is everybody's responsibility. We know, and you probably know, DJ Ambush, that the love of arts and culture is something that comes to people often at a very early age as they're
absolutely
inspired by, challenged by, in some cases, artistic endeavors and artistic undertakings. And it's sad that as our schools become less and less resourced, one of the first things to go is arts and cultural engagement. And linked to that, my fear is with this COVID crisis and its economic impact hitting our arts and culture institutions so hard that our public and private sector partners who work with the school districts will also find themselves unable to continue to provide the kinds of resources that they've been providing to our school children. So I would call on all of us, the city, the county, our partners in the state legislature, our private sector organizations, and others to really take up the ball. And one last area, and I promise I'll stop, but this is a great question. Arts and culture is foundational to our economy. And I know that rankles some people when I say it, but think about it this way. If you think about the importance of artistic endeavor, creativity, and innovation in industries as diverse as software development or shoe design and manufacturing, outdoor apparel, the things that are really core and central to our economy that hire the most of us, this idea that for a lot of young people, they may not become, quote, artists, unquote, fine artists, but they may in fact find themselves in a career choice someday that really requires them to lean in to that artistic and creative foundation that they should be getting as a child. And so I think there's opportunities for us to continue to call on the private sector to help us ensure that young people are exposed to arts and a cultural education at an early age. And I don't think any of us have asked that question in exactly the right way of our private sector partners. That being said, obviously there's some really good private sector partners out there who are working with the arts and culture community and supporting it financially and otherwise. But I think there's more we can do when I look at what other cities have done.
With regards to the private sector partners, are there any examples that you could identify now that you think are some really good situations?
Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. I never call out Nike without calling out Adidas or vice versa, just because I've learned as mayor that's a significant faux pas. So I will say they're both doing terrific work. I was really impressed when I recently visited Adidas new campus. They're expanding over there. They actually have an employee maker space. And they invite employees to come down to their maker space, and they have all of these tools, all of these resources, and they encourage their employees to get creative, think outside the box, do new and different stuff. And some of that, I presume, either filters into them as creative employees. It's perhaps viewed as something of a job training or creative opportunity for their employees. And they also open it up to school kids to come in and have them play around. And think about it, if you're 11, 12, 13 years old and you get invited into Adidas North American headquarters, and in fact, it is the home of some of their cultural and creative icons, and you're in the same place that those people work using the same tools that they're using, tell me that wouldn't be a heady experience for any kid, and maybe make them think differently about the direction they want their life to go and the impact of the arts on those decisions and the importance of engaging in the arts community.
Absolutely. Okay, next question. This is from OMPA. The city has workforce development funds and we have workforce development needs. It is imperative that we support a diverse talent pipeline in this industry, as well as the music and design industries. One program we have in place is Oregon Media Pathways that places traditionally underrepresented candidates in the paid positions on productions. How could you see the city supporting this or other equity-focused programming in our industries?
Yeah, there's two ways that come to mind. First of all, let me extend my thanks to everybody involved in the program to try and get more of our kids engaged in these career opportunities, to open their eyes to it, to be inspired by it. But secondarily, let me just second that, I'm not going to repeat the answer I just gave, except to say that arts, culture, creativity, whether it's fine arts, whether it's music, whether it's dance, regardless, all of these forms of art are centerpieces to an innovation economy, regardless of where you fit into that economy or what your job responsibility is. Underlying all of that is the ability to think in an innovative, creative, and thoughtful way. And so it's super important to the sustainability, the viability, and the expansion of our economic opportunities for everyone. But it is also true that people of color, young people of color, children have been disproportionately excluded from those opportunities that ultimately lead to the high skill, high wage jobs in our community. So it's important. I think there's two ways the city can specifically help support. Number one, through Prosper Portland, because we are connecting this to economic and job opportunities. And I'm really proud of the work we've done through the Inclusive Business Resource Network that supports businesses that are particularly owned or operated by people of color, including those that are engaged in the arts and cultural space. And then on the flip side, for the nonprofit sector in particular, but not exclusively, the allocation that we make through the Regional Arts and Culture Council. I think the city, rather than just handing over a check to RAC, we should really have a thoughtful dialogue, not so we tell RAC what to do with the funds, but so that we inform the decisions they and their board make. And we could do that by connecting them with the knowledge, the resources, and the community partners we work with in the economy to help them understand what those ultimate needs are and what pathways need to be created and what obstacles currently exist that prevent young people of color from being able to access those pathways. Those are just a couple of the ideas that I'd put forth.
Excellent. Well, that was our final question. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. DJ Ambush. I don't feel ambushed at all. I just want you to know. Stepping forward, and I appreciate the great work that you do in the community, that RAC does in the community. I know this is a really tough time for people in the arts and culture space. I want you to know all of us on the Portland City Council know that. We recognize it. We know there are a lot of families hurting, and we support you, and we will continue to support you. So thank you for everything you do for Portland.
Thank you. Appreciate you for your time.
Thank you.